With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Welcome back to Heard Tell. Just had my sip of sweet tea, so now we're raring to go. Our congressional insider, he does all kinds of congressional reporting for The Independent. You've seen him on here many, many times. Has a great book called We Are Not Broken. Make sure you buy it if you have not already. Eric Garcia is back. How are you, sir?
Doing well. How you doing? Good to be back.
You know, most reporters after the election, they get to take a little time off. Not congressional reporters, because boy, howdy, is it a busy week in Congress this week, ain't it?
Yeah, so it's important to recognize that right now. So the House is having its leadership votes this week, but that, which is kind of weird right now because we still technically don't know who has the majority. We know, I mean, it looks like it's going to be the Republicans, but so there's the kind of vote that's going on right there, and then on the same time, we got there is the leadership vote for the Senate. And that one is probably the one that's more that's going to be really interesting because there's a lot of knives out. I mean, there's a lot of people who are obviously trying to put the blame on Mitch McConnell. I don't really know how much I believe that. But then, of course, there's the House leadership vote for the Democrats because they're going to either be in like a very thin minority or a very small majority. So there's a lot going on. And then we still got a Georgia runoff.
Yeah, lots going on. Let's break those down for a second. Before we get into the politics, though, there's just some machinations to Congress. This is a machine that runs a certain way. So right now what's happening is you have the new elected folks coming in. I know J.D. Vance tweeted that he was in for his orientation this week, I believe, so he could take part in these meetings. You have the new people coming in. You got the old people going out. You got staff changing hands. There's a lot of just physical activity involved in a post-election season like this. For folks that don't see that, who aren't in the office buildings, who aren't in the tunnels, it's unmitigated chaos from now till the first of the year, isn't it?
It is totally. Like I was hanging out outside of there's this basement area in the Capitol Visitor Center where Republicans were having their leadership discussions, and like some staffers were talking to others about like, yeah, we're going in the middle because you also change offices every cycle. And depending on, and some people who get seniority, they move to different buildings, and then all the freshmen, they have their lottery draw. So there's that. On top of that, new members have orientation right now this week, and then the week after Thanksgiving. And then on top of that, there's the leadership votes for both parties, for the minority and the majority. So right now, and then on top of that, you got who's going to run. Who's going to run the campaign arms? So it is. There's just an onslaught of an avalanche of activity, even during this supposed lull, during Congress.
Because the truth is, and you report on Congress, you cover, there is no laws in Congress. There's no laws at all.
No. The only lulls happen when everybody's tired and wants to go home.
Well, the country's tired of them, wanting to go home, but that's another matter for another day. Let's start with some of the machinations here. Let's talk about the one that's not going to get settled this week first, because that's probably going to be the more pressing one. Let's say the Republicans, NBC's projecting it to be a 3-seat majority, although it's not settled yet. But let's work off that number, 3 to 5 seats, somewhere in there. That's probably safe. Kevin McCarthy, this is not going to be done this week. He's got time on this election, although they're going to do the inter-party election leadership thing. This is going to go for a while because he's in a position where he's got the brass ring in his grip, but he can't tear it down yet. He's going to be in a mood to give a lot of concessions to a lot of people. They're going to be really slow to finalize this, to get all those concessions. This process is probably going to take the better part of 4 or 5 weeks, right?
This is going to take the better part of 4 or 5 weeks. This is going to go until January 3rd, which is when the new members get sworn in and when the new speaker gets sworn in. He is going to have to give a ton of concessions to your Marjorie Taylor Greenes, your Matt Gaetzes, your Lauren Boebert. It looks like Lauren Boebert's going to win re-election. It is going to take a lot of work. It is going to take him basically saying people get to go back on committees. It's going to be giving people, prime jobs. He is going to have to keep a lot of people happy to hold this fragile coalition together. And the question a lot of people have always wondered about McCarthy is whether he is up to the task. That has always been the kind of immortal question for him, is like, can he actually wrangle these people? So that's what I'm wondering, because like, unlike Paul Ryan, who gave a lot to them, and John Boehner, who knew how to put the fear of God into them, he's not necessarily the guy you want on the wall, so to speak. So that and he doesn't have the political skill of someone like Pelosi.
Yeah, here's the thing with McCarthy. He's getting the job he's always wanted, and he's getting it at probably the worst possible time to get it, with absolutely almost no support. We already know that he's going to be very beholden to certain folks. Underneath all this, you have a GOP that's gearing itself up for who are we kind of fight for the next year or two, going into a presidential cycle.
Yes.
You already have people like Marjorie Taylor Greene who came out and supported him now, first thing I tweeted about that is like, no, she's not adjusting. She's worming her way in. That's what that one is.
Yeah, exactly.
I see no way he holds this caucus together, especially when you don't have. See, you speak on this because you can explain it better than I can. The reason you need a 15 to 20 seat majority is because you need to give your marginal members shade on votes and let them vote against you every now and then. And you release them to vote on things. That's how you get stuff done.
Yes.
That's not going to happen vis-a-vis. You ain't going to get a lot of stuff done.
Yes, so this is what Brendan Buck, who was Paul Ryan and Boehner's guy, told me, is that this is going to be a virtually impossible job. What you need, like you said, you need that cushion of like 15 to 20. The reason why is because there's always some members who are in tough races, and you basically release them to say, look, I understand you're in a tough race. Do what you need to do so that you can create some shade between the two of us. And I'll let you, we won't withhold money from you. We won't, stop anything from you. We'll just we'll let that fly. That is going to be very difficult, because if Marjorie Taylor Greene or Matt Gaetz, for example, don't want him to give an inch on the debt limit, which is something that very easily could happen, then McCarthy is going to need to go hat in hand to the Democrats, and he's going to need to say, okay, I need your help. And then that's going to whether it's Nancy Pelosi or Hakeem Jeffries or whoever is leading that caucus, is going to say, okay, then, well, you're not going to, I don't know, withhold money for the DC government, or just some kind of hypothetical, or you're not going to cut off funding for Planned Parenthood or anything like that. So they are going to have a lot more. So this gives Democrats a lot more leverage, and it gives McCarthy a real almost kind of gun to his head.
Yeah. Let's talk for a second about who's going to be on that other wall. Nancy Pelosi, of course, said she wasn't going to run again. That was kind of the deal to keep. I don't see any way she doesn't, because they're going to really need. It sounds weird to say this. This is where they really, really need her, because they could get a lot done with this slim majority. McCarthy's going to be getting it from all angles. She absolutely loves to live to make the Republican leadership's lives miserable.
Yes.
There's no way she's not in charge of the minority here for the next 2 years, is there?
A lot of people don't realize this about Nancy Pelosi, and a lot of people criticize her, but her primary skill is keeping, and her main chit that she has is keeping the caucus unified. I don't know anybody. Steny, God bless his heart. Hakeem is too abrasive to progressives. Clyburn is a whip, but he's not necessarily the enforcer. I can't think of anybody who could get Henry Cuellar and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to vote as a block. And that is what Pelosi does. She's made a very, for all the things that people criticize her for, she makes sure that the caucus votes as a block. And I don't think you can get another Democrat who could do that, especially, and that's going to be especially needed when it comes to things like keeping the government open, or avoiding a debt ceiling disaster.
Yeah. let's switch over to the Senate for just a second, because the House is going to be a mess, and we're going to be talking about it for the better part of the next 2 years. Let's start with our Republican friends. Boy, the Twitter was just ablaze about whose fault this election was, and a lot of the MAGA people wanted to go to Mitch McConnell. A little more complicated than that.
It is a lot more complicated than that. So let's just let's talk about this. Let's talk about Mitch McConnell. It's important to remember that before Trump, a lot of conservatives didn't really like Mitch McConnell. They thought that he was too conciliatory toward Democrats. They thought that he didn't win enough elections. They thought it wasn't until he blocked Merrick Garland that you get the kind of image of McConnell as the ruthless tactician. This is very much a reversion to the mean, but for better or for worse, McConnell, you know, a lot of conservatives and MAGA people are mad at him for not bankrolling Blake Masters. That's only partially true. He did raise money for Masters, but he just didn't use his Senate leadership fund to bankroll Masters because they looked at the focus groups and Blake Masters was just so repellent to so many swing voters and so many other voters that thought he was too extreme. I mean, mind you, Arizona is a state that elected Barry Goldwater. So there's that on top, but that is really not fair to blame McConnell because he did his job. J.D. Vance would not be a senator without Mitch McConnell spending something like $30 million in Ohio during the summer or during the fall. That race would not, the North Carolina race would not have been out of reach for Democrats had he not just poured a bunch of money in. Ron Johnson's now calling for a delay. Ron Johnson in Wisconsin's calling for a delay in leadership votes. That is a bunch of horse hockey because McConnell's spending in Wisconsin probably made the difference in that 1 point seat, that 1 point race in Wisconsin. So there's a lot of desire to blame McConnell, but the truth of the matter is that Trump just endorsed a lot of bad candidates. Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania, J.D. Vance in Ohio required a lot more money that could have gone elsewhere. Blake Masters in Arizona, Herschel Walker in Georgia, just a lot of candidates that required more spending than should have been needed. And on top of that, the other thing is just like in the House, the Dobbs effect was real.
Eric Garcia joining us, our congressional friend. McConnell's got another problem besides Trump and the MAGA wing, though.
Yes.
This is not my opinion. This is sourced because I'm not a journalist, but I do journalist adjacent stuff. So I talk to people. I don't just sit here and spout things off. This is sourced. Yeah. He's got a Rick Scott problem. Rick Scott is grumpy. Rick Scott's got a lot of money. He's got a lot of ambition, and nobody likes him, and he's got no future prospects. This has mixed because remember the summer thing we had back in the spring. He launched his plan. Everybody mocked it, including one of the few things that everybody agreed on from Biden to McConnell to whoever is like, no, Rick, shut up and go away. This isn't helping. Yes. We had the yacht incident, which came out of McConnell's office. Let's all be adults.
Yes.
He's mad. He's grumpy. And, people are saying, like, man, it wasn't 5 minutes after this election. He started calling folks that letter about delaying the leadership election that had 3 names on it, but that was a Rick Scott production. Let's all be honest.
Yes.
What's he going to do with Rick Scott? Now, McConnell's got the votes to keep his minority leadership.
Yes.
That's not in question. But this isn't getting worked out anytime soon. This is a problem.
This is going to be a huge problem for Mitch McConnell. So let's be adults. This race, so the leadership races, all of them, on the Republican side at least, are uncontested. So he's going to get the leadership position. The 3 senators, I think it was Lee, Johnson and Scott or someone, and then Rubio. I mean, they called for a delay in leadership, and then Rubio kind of called for a delay in leadership votes as well. Even though him and Rubio don't necessarily get along, Scott and Rubio don't get along, I should say. But this is going to be a continuous problem because Rick Scott doesn't. I'm trying to think of the word. Mitch McConnell doesn't own Rick Scott. Let me put it that like there. Other senators are beholden to McConnell because he provides them money. Rick Scott can just write a $150 million check and, you know, self-fund his campaign, and he's okay. That is something that McConnell's going to have to deal with because Rick Scott can run an ad campaign and bash McConnell, or he can go to Fox News, or he can go to Bret Baier, and he can, you know, kvetch about his woes with McConnell. But McConnell really can't do anything about it. And that's the real tough thing. And also, the other difficult thing is that McConnell's losing a lot of his foot soldiers after this Congress. He's losing Rob Portman. He's losing Roy Blunt. He's losing Richard Burr. There aren't going to be a lot of those grunts who are usually the bulwark against people like Rick Scott.
Yeah, and the other part of that is, too, Eric Garcia joining us, those are the grunts that did a lot of legislating and stayed off of TV and Twitter.
Yes.
Which is the opposite of what Rick Scott does, which is he's all over TV and social media and wanting to run for higher office and doesn't actually do a whole lot of legislating. That's the problem, because when this Congress comes back, there was stuff that got pushed to this lame duck on purpose. And now there's a lot of questions if this lame duck session is going to get anything done. By the way, on top of the rest of this, you've got this potential freight railroad strike that usually Congress can order arbitration to this labor issue that's getting ready to pop off right before Christmas due to union laws. I don't know if this lame duck's going to get anything done now, and that's a big reason. Look, Burr's leaving, so is he checked out? People like this, that's a big problem.
Yeah, a lot of people are like on their a lot of senators who are retiring are kind of like seniors in the last month before high school ends. You know, so Schumer just teed up a vote on codifying same-sex marriage for Wednesday. So that's going to happen. But then on top of that, you've got the potential railroad strike. A lot of the unions pushed back on Biden and Secretary Walsh's arbitration. Deal with business and rails. So that's going to be a tough bid. On top of that, you've got a question of whether or not you're going to have a debt ceiling raise this kind of interim period, because there's really not a guarantee you can raise the debt limit in a Republican House anymore. So there is going to be a lot of difficult questions, and there's a lot of people are going to be cramming right before the end of the year.
Yeah, Eric Garcia joining us. Let's talk about the Democratic side of the Senate right now. 49 plus 1, 50 plus 1. Here's the reason why it's a big difference if it's 50-50 with a tie break and 51-49, depending on the Georgia runoff. And we'll talk about the Georgia runoff in just a second. 50-50, they have to split the committee assignments.
Yes.
51-49, they don't split the committee assignments, which means they're going to have the subpoena powers. This is one of those little technicality things that a lot of people don't think about. You cover Congress, though. Talk about what a big difference it is between a 50-50 Senate and a 51-49 Senate.
That is a big deal because, so for example, the perfect example of this is the Senate Judiciary Committee. In the earlier this year, when the committee voted on Ketanji Brown Jackson's confirmation, it was a deadlock, and Schumer had to do a special procedure on the floor to bring Jackson's vote to the floor, the vote to confirm Jackson to the floor. On top of that, as you said, being in the majority in the Senate, you get all the subpoena power. So that includes for the Senate Intel Committee, where that is incredibly important. The Senate Judiciary Committee, that is incredibly important. You get more staff, you get better offices, you get more. You basically get more allocation for the majority, and to say nothing of the more members on your committee, so that you can break ties. That is incredibly important. So a lot of people are like, oh, well, 50-50, Democrats still have the power because Kamala Harris breaks the tie. No, they still they have to do these kind of very tenuous power sharing agreements. And a lot of people don't recognize as much as Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer may fight for the TV screens, they still have to come to an agreement of, okay, this is how it's going to do. This is how it's going to work. This is how we're going to share power. This is how it's going to go. And then they have to, plan accordingly. That is not good. If Democrats if Raphael Warnock wins, that is going to make all the difference for them on committees and confirmations and everything else they want to do.
Yeah, of course, Raphael Warnock is the incumbent out of Georgia because of the last Georgia runoff, which we all know how that happened. What's the sense in Congress with this? Because I think, and of course the Trump announcement is going to deal with this a little bit, I think the runoff actually hurts Walker. I know Kemp's going to campaign hard for him, but Kemp's not on the ballot to raise him. He underperformed Kemp anyway. Trump's out. The issue now is the Trump inter-GOP fight that's going on. I think the runoff is actually going to hurt Walker now, where I didn't think that a couple of weeks ago. What are your thoughts? But what is Congress thinking?
So it was interesting. We were talking with, I was talking with Senator Gary Peters, who's chairman of the DSCC. That's his job is to, elect Democrats. He was like, when I asked him about Trump running, he's like, he basically was like, right now it's just about Georgia. He's like, he basically deflected. The Democrats are laser focused on this. They are, focused on, ignore all the noise. We are giving all of our resources to Warnock. And it should also be said, Warnock himself is a money printer. Him and Mark Kelly are probably the two best fundraisers that Democrats have. John Ossoff is throwing his entire political operation behind it. Everybody in the Democratic conference is now just like, okay, our job is to salvage Raphael Warnock. Whereas, but I think that, and Mitt Romney said this last night. He's like, we've lost 3 races because of Trump. And now, this, he basically said, yeah, this could affect us in Georgia. And then, Senator John Neely Kennedy, who likes to pretend he's Foghorn Leghorn, even though he's an Oxford educated guy, he's like, I'm not focused on 2024. I'm focused on 2022. Everything right now, Republicans and Democrats are focused on this. I think as of right now, the momentum is with the Democrats, just because they won Pennsylvania, they won Nevada, Arizona, New Hampshire. And then, as you said, I agree with you about the Kemp thing, because Kemp will campaign for Walker, but he can't carry, his supporters aren't going to carry Walker over the finish line. Conversely, Stacey Abrams won't be as much of a drag on Raphael Warnock as Kemp was a boon to Walker.
Funny how things switch around. Last campaign we thought it was the other way around. Eric Garcia. Okay, here's the thing is the media narratives. One thing I took from this election I've been talking about is like, look, national narratives, you got to be real careful slamming them into congressional and Senate races and statewide races, right? Congress, one of the reasons I talk to you and other people that actually work in Congress is because the people in Congress, you usually cut through some of that noise because they know what's really going on. Right. Besides the leadership elections, what are they talking about? Are they talking about 2024? Are they talking about the state of the Congress? Are they talking about the spectrum of whether Trump's running and what that means? What is it that the Congress people and senators, what are they talking about right now this week, now that the election's done?
They are talking about 2 things and 2 things alone: the Georgia runoffs and the debt limit. Those are kind of the 2 things, those, at least on the Senate side. I think that there is this expectation of, okay, we know that it's not going to be likely that you get a debt limit increase under a Republican Congress, because McCarthy just wouldn't have the votes, and I don't think he wants to go to the Democrats to save his hide and prevent a default. So right now, that is the primary focus. On top of that, the primary focus is just everybody on the Senate is just like, We just got to wait it out. We just got to go to Georgia. And then, you know, it's funny because they still have this vote on same-sex marriage on Wednesday, but it's almost like that's a foregone conclusion. I was talking with a few aides. They think like, yeah, we got the 60 votes we need to do for this. So right now, the main thing everybody's focused on is getting this debt limit stuff, getting all the stuff that they kind of pushed off until the election done, like getting their homework done before they all go home, before they finish for the year. So that is the main challenge right now, is just let's avoid a potential economic disaster in 2023.
Is the debt limit going to turn into a fight this time, or are they just going to push it off on the new Congress since they know, or is it because they know deadlock is coming? Somebody's going to dig their heels in here, because McCarthy's got a lot out there about how he doesn't want to do this going forward. Right. Is that going to affect this one?
Yeah. So right now, I think that there's this feeling. So Manchin just said yesterday, Senator Joe Manchin said that, you know, he thinks the debt limit deal should be bipartisan. Other people are talking about doing it through reconciliation because that would just allow for 51 votes. And some people question whether there would be 10 Republicans who would go along with that. So there is a lot of contention about, there's this feeling that we need to do this now because McCarthy has said, as he said, I don't want to do this in the future.
Speaking of which, since you just mentioned them, a lot of Democrats are like, oh, we got a majority now. We don't have to listen to Manchin and Sinema anymore. No, folks, that's not how politics works, especially since you've basically, I'm talking to our Team Blue friends here, you've basically announced that you're going to be gunning for Sinema and her seat in 2 years. You kind of shouldn't telegraph stuff like that, because guess what you just did? You made her way more important now.
Yes.
Just walk through that, because, yes, Murkowski, Manchin, Collins, Sinema, the usual suspects are still going to be just as important with a one-seat majority or a tied Senate.
Absolutely. In fact, they're probably going to – Steve Dennis at Bloomberg pointed this out. Because this morning, Alex Mooney, Representative Alex Mooney from West Virginia, announced he's running against Manchin. Manchin's going to need to take some votes against nominees just to salvage his own hide. That makes Sinema all the more crucial. She's going to be the swing vote now. And that, you know, a lot of Team Blue doesn't recognize. Manchin, at the end of the day, he wants to get to yes on most things. Sinema, it's never clear if she wants to get to yes or no. That was the big challenge during the IRA vote. Unless Sinema is sponsoring something herself, it's not entirely clear that she wants to get to yes on a Democratic sponsored piece of legislation. So she could very easily become the block swing voter. This is also why Democrats probably are regretting not spending in North Carolina and not spending enough in Wisconsin to push back on the crime stuff with Mandela Barnes, because now they have to rely on Sinema much more than they have to rely on Manchin. So they're not out of the woods yet.
Yeah, and to be fair, just because this is my neck of the woods, Mooney's got 2 challenges in the ethics committee looking at him in the face. So that's also why he announced right now, because Morrissey, Jim Justice has joked about me. I don't think he really will. He's not going to be the only person going after that Senate seat. He's just trying to be first and get his name out there and distract from this other stuff that's going to be going on the next few weeks with him. So just for what it's worth, put that in the back of your pocket.
The context is important. Alex Mooney is he's under a lot of investigations for unscrupulous activity.
And a red painted fire plug is going to win a congressional seat in West Virginia right now. So that's not the concern. This is a Mooney looking for Mooney kind of move right here.
Yes, exactly.
Eric Garcia, this stuff's always great. I'll leave you with one more good little tidbit though. Once we get through here and we get through the lame duck, we get through all this stuff, we get the new Congress seated in January. What's the first order of business really going to be? McCarthy's promising everybody the moon. They're going to have to settle on something. We've got some economic stuff. We already talked about that rail strike could be a big deal right around Christmas. Yeah. What's the first thing they actually go after here?
That is a tough question, because they're probably going to need to do a seat. They're probably going to need to start working on the omnibus even though, because that's going to take a month.
Which they swear up and down, McCarthy's swearing up and down they aren't going to do, because the conservatives, that's one of their conditions for letting him be speaker. And yet you're saying that's the first thing they're going to do. You see where the problem comes in right off the jump here.
Yeah, exactly. That's going to be the tough thing, is the omnibus spending. They need it. That's a must pass piece of legislation. The conservatives are saying, heck no. And probably some more 4-letter words. And that is, and that alone is going to be difficult. On top of that, McCarthy's saying he wants to get rid of the magnetometers and proxy voting. The problem with that is that a lot of his own voters, his own members, use proxy voting. So good luck with that, buddy. But then on top of that, they also need to take into account that when are they going to, they're not going to be able to pass the budget, so they're probably going to have to settle for a CR. So the first order of business, is going to be deciding what the first order of business is going to be.
Lots of interesting days, which means I get to have you on the program a whole lot, my friend, going forward.
I look forward to that.
Let folks know where they keep up with you. Eric Garcia, our congressional reporter. He works for The Independent. Great book out. We'll talk about that. Usually we bring it up. We'll talk about it some other time. Let folks know where they can go, where they can follow you, and where they can get your book, my friend.
You can buy my book, We're Not Broken, Changing the Autism Conversation, wherever fine books are sold. You can you can follow me on Twitter at Eric M. Garcia. Follow my work at The Independent, my column at MSNBC, and I will see you on the road.
Yeah, brother, we're going to be doing this a lot, because this is going to be one of the most interesting congressional terms I think we've ever seen. Don't think there's any doubt about that one. My friend, love talking to you. Let's do it again soon.
Let's do it again. Thank you.
Thanks, buddy. So contradictory to what you painted out as Mike Pence. Not to be hard. I mean, there's no other logical explanation here. This was a calculated decision on the part of Mike Pence. He did a pros and cons, and he decided, this is the wagon I'm going to. Now, we understand politically he was kind of dead-ended in Indiana for a couple different reasons. Yeah. He made this decision to hitch up with Trump, and everything from that moment till now is dealing with that decision. No, right?
Yes. You know what's fascinating about that is, and I write extensively about that, there's a 2-week stretch in July 2016 where things kind of come together. The Trump campaign plane pops a flat in Indiana, and he gets stuck there, and it kind of forces him into signing up Pence. And it's been out. I put a lot of that out there already, but I will tell you that when in this decision making, the kind of the calculus for Mike and Karen Pence, remember too that they do work as a joint operation. So it's really the two of them. Is that it's the same calculation everyone else is making, the same calculation that Mitch McConnell makes, not Kevin McCarthy, I'm sorry, Paul Ryan, but for other Republican leaders, which is Donald Trump won't be a problem in 4 months because he'll lose. Because, my God, how could this guy win the presidency? Like, everybody's operating under that assumption. And one of our tells on this is that we know about this in particular is because Pence's aides are going out there and telling Republican donors, lining them up for a presidential run in 2020, saying, hey, hop on board now, get at the table early, and you'll be there with the possible front runner, because Pence will have run on a national ticket with Trump at that point. Theoretically, will not have been too politically damaged. And there does come one key moment of truth. I mean, it's funny to think how quaint this sounds given all that we know now. But think back to October of 2016. The Access Hollywood tape where Trump, brags about molesting women and popping Tic Tac so he can molest women. And and Pence has a decision to make whether they hop off. That's probably where he should have gotten off, the train. But he didn't. And they both decided to stay on there. And it was a political calculation. Obviously they prayed with it too, but it's impossible to avoid the the politics of that, and it led them right to here.
And here is, now we have another political calculation. We get to January 6th. We have the riot, the insurrection that was inside of the riot. Let's not parse all that out today. We have whatever happened with Mike Pence in the building that we're still arguing about, I'm not getting in the car, all that kind of mess. But let's just stick to the political calculation part, because we know this is fact because it's on camera and we watched him do it. He hung with Trump through everything else up until the point of certifying the election, and that's when he picked his moment to break. So everything between there and there, he was okay with. From the outside observer, and you tell me because you know more about him than I did, that was, I rode this to the absolute last possible moment I could, and then I stepped off. That's how it looks to me as the biographer, as the guy who knows him better than probably anybody else in the media. Is that how it came across to you?
On January 6th, when he wrote that letter, and I remember, I was writing a story. I was in the middle of writing a story about that letter because it sounded like the guy that had been subsumed by Donald Trump. It sounded like the real Mike Pence, the guy that used to study Russell Kirk. It sounded like who he is inside. And I was astounded by this. I was like, wow, where was this guy for the last 4 years? Right or wrong, it's a reflection of character, his character. And then I have C-SPAN on in the background. And I see Niels Lesniewski from his roll call, CQ roll call. And he's like, well, we're sheltering in place right now, and I can't really tell you where that is because it's a secure location. And I'm kind of like, what the hell, Niels? Like, what are you talking about, man? Like, and then I flip around a little bit more. I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, wait a minute, is this real? Like, is any of this real? It's like right after 1 o'clock on January 6th. And I'm like, oh God, like, and I thought, as this all unfolded and as we saw him act on that day, I thought, wow, maybe Mike Pence is finally being himself. And then 3 months later, he's back on the campaign trail, more or less running for president in 2024, hasn't stated it, not talking about January 6th, calculating again. And I am vexed by this. I really am. I'm still vexed by this because, again, this week, sometimes we see him have like little flashes of courage where he'll say, Trump was wrong on January 6th. And that gets everybody, a Twitter about it, and we all write stories about it. But then he goes back to talking about how, great everything was when they were working together. And boy, wasn't January 6th just a, quote, tragic day. And it's a lack of, it doesn't, calling it a tragic day doesn't, would you call Pearl Harbor a tragic day? It just doesn't, it doesn't ring correct. And I see him struggling with it. But again, the flip side of this, which I always come back to, is knowing the political audience and what he's trying to do, which is running for president. That's what it looks like. He's not declared. He's not, he hasn't said it outright. He's doing the actions. You don't hang out in New Hampshire, Iowa, South Carolina, Nevada, unless you got the plan, okay? And in some sense, and this is what the Trump people will tell you, it's almost like a revenge tour. Trump tries to get him killed or almost gets him killed on January 6th because he's, staging this coup. This is how you do it. It's similar to the Mitch McConnell calculation. You don't beat Trump, and I do think this is correct in the politics of it. If you were on the Republican side, where the vast majority of Republican voters do believe that January 6th was either not a coup or not an insurrection, or a smaller subset believes it's a false flag operation, or whatever. There's no evidence of any of that. how do you address that? You know, if you're running for those votes, how do you do that? I always have to bring myself back to that, you know, because like in this moment in politics, we just don't have clarity in that world, in that side of things. You know, it's not. I'm sure there's a Democratic corollary, but I'm still watching this right now. I'm having a hard time finding it.
See, I think I might have been wrong about Pence in this respect, because we always talk about presidential candidates. You got to have a constituency. Doesn't matter your popularity. What's your constituency? Joe Biden shocked everybody because he had the constituency and they showed up, and all of a sudden that race was over in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I always said Mike Pence doesn't have a constituency, but as we've talked through this, the biggest constituency that made Donald Trump president was the same ones that we're dealing with January 6th, was the same ones that Mike Pence is thinking about now. It's those evangelical Christians and Republicans and conservatives, and I'm going to use that term broadly. We'll argue it some other day.
Sure.
It is what it is. That group of people, that outsiders who are not them, the news media, the center, the left, the progressives, they can never figure them out and go, how can you believe this, X, Y, and Z evangelical Christianity, and still support Y, Donald Trump? Doesn't Pence have a I think that's who he's shooting for. I think that's who he sees himself as, is, oh, I did it, but I didn't compromise myself. This is his monologue, not mine. He's saying, this is how we did it. We accomplished some things. There were some bad things. I broke with him when it went too far, because let's be honest, whoever's the next leader of the Republican Party is going to be the guy who takes out Trump, because you got to do that to get that job. That's how that's going to go. He is clearly, purposefully pointing out, we see it in Arizona, we saw it in Georgia, we're seeing it in other places. He is starting that process now. This is another political calculation. So my question to you is, this is unfair, but it's your job because you wrote the book, is which Mike Pence is this? Is this the calculated one? Is this the real Mike Pence? Or is Mike Pence, to use an old wrestling term, has he believed the gimmick because he's been running for president for 6 years, and this is who Mike Pence is now? Does he believe the gimmick? Because I think the cultural Christianity Mike Pence gimmick is just who he is after 6 years of being it.
I'm going to tell you, man, I'm going to tell you a great. Okay, so you ready? I did dissect this in the book, and it's okay. So I had this question too. You know, why is Pence, who goes to Greenwood Community Church in Indianapolis and 96th Street Community Church? I attended service at 96th Street Church, and I did not hear people, spewing, brimstone and fire and talking about how we, got to draw and quarter gaze because that's an affront to God or whatever. I did not hear that in the service, and I did not hear that from the people that I know that attend service there. That's not that type of church. And everything I could find is that's not that Mike Pence's type of practice. I talk a lot about in the book about premillennial dispensationalism, because that is a thing that feeds into this concept of Trump as a savior character. Even to Pence's people would even talk about him in this sense. When Craig Jacob in January 6th hearing said that he turns to Daniel 6, he brings, reads that. I'm getting tingles right now thinking about it. I get chills, man. It's really, I do. Every time this comes up in the hearings, man, I just get chills. That's Daniel and the Lion. And look who the protagonist is. Pence is a Daniel character to his people. This is how they talk about him. He is a Daniel. He is the slave who is a faithful servant to the tyrant and to God. Again, the dutifulness. Yeah, I know, man. Right? I get chills just thinking about it, because there is a depth to the character, but there's also, there's also a depth to the BS too. That's also part of it. Trump is such a surface level character that it's easy to forget that there's layers to other humans. Like Trump is a pretty transparent person. A lot of other people are not, you know?
See, that's where I draw the line between Trump and Pence. And maybe this is unfair, but this is just me being, you know, a political observer and an analysis and a writer and a host of media.
Mm-hmm.
Trump is what he is. He's true to who he is, although I disagree with lots of it. I think that's bad. I think it's been bad for the country. He is who he is. That's his natural state. I don't see anywhere where the Mike Pence stuff isn't far more calculated. There's just, and I'm just going off action. There's just no other way to call it. Trump's just doing it the way he thinks he ought to do it. It's just who he is. Pence is navigating around this, and the problem with navigating around it is you have to be calculated. And the more calculated he is, the more apparent he is that the "all shucks, God loves me and Ma just trying to get through life here." Yeah. That last tweet about Trump, that was stone cold. Like he is more calculated by the day and by the tweet. This is just me observing it as mostly unbiased because I didn't vote for him. I think he's getting more and more calculated because this is learned experience for him over the last few years.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. It's a couple things on that. He is calculating, and it's this whatever pre-campaign for president in 2024 that we're watching right now, and most people do expect him to run for president. Is calculating. He's picking in his shots. You know, he did, you know, Brian Kemp showdown in Georgia, and he won that one. You know, he won that proxy battle. Got another one coming up with Wisconsin. He is incredibly calculating there. And it does make me wonder, you know, I still wonder about, you know, who is the core of this guy. There's certain things that, you know, very much, you know, very obvious about is the core of him. Pro-life, anti-abortion, 100%. And there's a good barometer for that, which is you look at the rest of the hypotheticals in the prospective 2024 field, and they're running away from it. Donald Trump, who, you know, should get the political credit for this, for putting 3 justices on there, you know, or arguably McConnell should, anyway, you know, but he's running from it. He's saying we shouldn't be talking about this. Cotton, Pompeo, Haley, all the rest of them, you know, they're kind of running away from this. Pence is running into it. He's running on it. He's holding that down. That might just be a life raft, but he's doing it. So, and I do think that is part of his core. He has been consistent on that. But the other stuff, I don't know. You know, I still struggle with this. After 11 years of following this guy, like I don't always know who he is.
And that'll do it for Heard Tell. As always, love to hear from you. HeardTellShow@gmail.com. You can send us an email, Heard Tell Show on the Twitter. You can DM us and follow us there. Also, my Twitter handle, for the Fire, and those of our guests is always in the lower third graphics. If you're watching on the YouTube, if you're listening on the podcast, there'll be links for you to follow both the writing of the folks we have on and us and our social media. This only works because you listen, and we so greatly appreciate you. So wherever you are, across the street or around the world, we hope you and yours are well. We hope you are well fed. We can't wait to see you again for more Heard Tell. All the music on Heard Tell is provided under a Creative Content license from monstercat.com.